Life has a peculiar way of turning ordinary moments into extraordinary destinies. On the outskirts of a rain-soaked city, Sarah Mitchell's modest apartment building stood as a testament to countless sacrifices made for her daughter's future. That stormy Tuesday evening seemed like any other. Dishes waiting in the sink, bills scattered across the kitchen table, and the constant juggle of being both mom and provider weighing heavily on her shoulders. But when a soaking wet stranger appeared at her door, seeking refuge from the downpour, Sarah's simple act of kindness would unexpectedly rewrite not just her story, but the fairy tale she never believed possible. Behind that drenched exterior and genuine smile lay a secret that would shake the foundations of both their worlds. One that began with a crown and ended with a choice that would challenge everything they thought they knew about love, trust, and the true meaning of wealth. What would you do if the stranger you rescued turned out to be someone who could change not just your life, but everything you believed about fairy tales coming true? Before we dive deeper into this extraordinary tale, tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story will warm your heart in ways you never expected. The rhythmic pounding of rain against windows had become white noise in Sarah's small but warm two-bedroom apartment. Her daughter Emma's homework papers were spread across the coffee table, decorated with gold star stickers from her third-grade teacher. The kitchen timer chimed insistently, pulling Sarah's attention from the stack of accounting reports she'd brought home from work. Another late dinner, another night of juggling responsibilities that never seemed to end. 5 more minutes, sweetheart, she called out to Emma, who was engrossed in her favorite reading nook, a pile of cushions wedged between the bookshelf and the window. The gentle sound of her daughter's voice reading aloud to herself brought a tired smile to Sarah's face. These moments, simple as they were, made every struggle worthwhile. Lightning flashed outside, followed by a thunderous crack that rattled the windows. Emma yelped, abandoning her book to seek refuge in the kitchen. "Mom, this one's really bad," she said, pressing against Sarah's side as she stirred the pasta sauce. "It's just nature's light show, baby," Sarah assured her, running a hand through Emma's unruly curls, the same auburn shade as her own. "Remember what we learned about thunder? It's just—" A sharp knock at the door cut through their conversation, causing both of them to jump. Sarah frowned, glancing at the microwave clock, 8:47 p.m. They weren't expecting anyone, and their building's security door was supposed to be locked at this hour. Another knock, more urgent this time. "Stay here," Sarah instructed Emma, turning down the stove burner. She approached the door cautiously, positive she could hear heavy breathing on the other side. The peephole revealed a figure she didn't recognize. A man, well-dressed, but completely drenched, water dripping from what looked like expensive clothes. "Hello?" she called through the door, keeping her voice firm despite her apprehension. "Can I help you?" "I'm so sorry to disturb you," came the reply, the voice carrying an accent she couldn't quite place. "My car broke down on the main road, and my phone is dead. I saw your light on, and I just—" A pause, followed by what sounded like a shiver. "I wondered if I might use your phone to call for assistance. I understand if you'd rather not." Sarah hesitated, her hand on the chain. Lock. Every city instinct told her to politely decline, to suggest he try the convenience store 2 blocks over. But something in his voice, a genuine note of distress mixed with embarrassment, made her pause. Through the peephole, she could see him starting to turn away, shoulders slumped in resignation. "Mom?" Emma whispered from the kitchen. "Is someone stuck in the rain?" That simple question, filled with childlike concern, made Sarah's decision. She unlatched the chain, keeping the second lock in place, and opened the door just enough to get a better look. The man before her was tall, with dark hair plastered to his forehead, and what might have been an expensive suit completely soaked through. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, kind eyes, filled with both hope and apology. "You're absolutely drenched," she found herself saying, surprised by the sympathy in her own voice. From his grip fell what looked like a business Card, immediately caught by the wind and carried away before he could catch it. Look, the storm's getting worse. Why don't you come in and dry off? We were just making dinner anyway. Sarah reached for her grandmother's quilt, carefully stored in the entry closet for chilly nights. It was her most treasured possession, a wedding gift passed down through generations, each patch telling a story of love and family. As she handed it to the stranger, she caught Emma watching with wide-eyed curiosity from the kitchen doorway. The stranger's relief was palpable, though he still hesitated. "I don't want to impose." "You're not imposing if I'm offering," Sarah said, surprising herself with her certainty. "I'm Sarah Mitchell, and that's my daughter Emma peeking around the corner. And you are—" He stepped inside, careful to stay on the welcome mat, water pooling around his expensive shoes. "James," he said simply, offering a smile that transformed his whole face. "Just James, and I cannot thank you enough for your kindness." As he wrapped the quilt around his shoulders, Sarah noticed his hands, smooth, uncalloused, with a faint tan line where a ring might have recently been. Everything about him spoke of a different world than her own. Yet here he was, dripping onto her welcome mat, holding her family quilt with the kind of careful reverence that told her more about his character than any words could. "Well, just. James," she said, trying to lighten the moment, "let's get you dried off and warmed up. Emma, honey, can you get our guest a towel from the bathroom? The clean one's on the top shelf." What Sarah couldn't know, as she closed the door against the storm, was that this simple act of compassion would set in motion events that would transform not just her life, but the very notion of what she believed possible. Emma returned with not just one towel, but an entire stack, her natural generosity shining through. James accepted them with a gracious "Thank you, miss," that made the little girl beam. As he dried his hair, the sleeve of his jacket pulled back slightly, revealing an expensive watch he quickly tried to conceal, a gesture that didn't escape Sarah's notice. "The bathroom's down the hall if you'd like to properly dry off," Sarah offered, gesturing toward the narrow corridor. "I can throw your jacket in the dryer if you'd like. It looks too nice to stay soaked." "That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to trouble you," James replied, though his shoulders relaxed visibly in the warmth of the apartment. "Though, I must admit, something smells wonderful." "Mom makes the best spaghetti," Emma proclaimed proudly, bouncing on her toes. "She puts secret ingredients in the sauce." Sarah laughed, returning to the kitchen to rescue said sauce from burning. "The secret ingredient is desperation and whatever vegetables I can hide in there without someone noticing." She stirred the hot, adding over her shoulder, "There's plenty if you'd like to join us. It's nothing fancy, but it's hot." "Yeah, stay," Emma added enthusiastically. "You can tell us about your car. Is it a fancy one? It must be fancy with those shoes." "Emma," Sarah cautioned, but James chuckled. "It's quite all right," he said, finally relenting and shrugging off his jacket. "And yes, I suppose it is rather fancy, though right now it's rather useless. I should probably call that service station after dinner," Sarah found herself saying. "Everything's closed in this weather anyway, and you might as well wait somewhere warm." She pulled down an extra plate, surprised by how natural this felt despite the strangeness of the situation. As James disappeared to the bathroom to dry off, Emma helped set the table, chattering away about her day at school. Sarah noticed she pulled out their fancy cloth napkins, usually reserved for holidays, and had to hide a smile at her daughter's attempt at elegance. When James returned, he'd managed to somewhat tame his hair, though his dress shirt still clung damply to his shoulders. Sarah couldn't help but notice the way he carried himself, an unconscious elegance that seemed at odds with their humble kitchen. He paused at the threshold, and something in his expression, a sort of wistful wonder, made her heart twist unexpectedly. "This is lovely," he said softly, taking in the simple scene. Mismatched plates, a bottle of grocery store wine Sarah had splurged on last week, Emma's artwork decorating the fridge. Truly lovely. Dinner proved to be surprisingly comfortable. James praised the spaghetti with such genuine enthusiasm that Sarah felt her cheeks warm, and he listened to Emma's school stories with complete attention, asking questions that delighted the 8-year-old. He was careful, she noticed, in how he spoke about himself. Vague mentions of work in the family business and traveling quite a bit, deflecting personal questions with practiced ease. But it was the way he held his fork that caught her attention. Perfect posture, European style, each movement precise, combined with the watch he kept trying to hide and that accent she still couldn't place. Sarah began to form theories about their mysterious guest. Old money, perhaps, or foreign business. Either way, he was clearly far from their social circle. "May I help with the dishes?" he offered as they finished, but Sarah waved him off. "You're our guest," she insisted, "though you could help Emma with her math homework if you're feeling charitable. I saw you cringe when she mentioned fractions." James laughed, a real laugh this time, unguarded. "Is it that obvious? Numbers have always been a passion of mine, though my father would prefer I focus on other aspects of the business." For the next hour, Sarah cleaned up, while listening to James patiently explain fractions to Emma, using pieces of paper torn into various shapes. Her daughter's delighted, "Oh, now I get it," brought a smile to both adults' faces, and Sarah caught James looking almost wistful again. "The rain's letting up," Sarah noted eventually, glancing out the window. "Would you like to try calling that service station now?" "Yes, I suppose I should," James said, though he seemed reluctant to break the comfortable moment. He reached for his phone, then hesitated. "I may need to make a somewhat private call, if you don't mind." "Of course," Sarah said, curiosity pickling at his careful tone. "You can use my bedroom, first door on the left." As James disappeared to make his call, Emma helped Sarah fold the family quilt, now dry from James's use. "I like him, Mum," she said simply. "He doesn't treat me like I'm stupid just because I'm a kid." "No, he doesn't," Sarah agreed softly, wondering why that observation made her heart beat just a little faster. From her bedroom, she could hear James speaking in what sounded like another language, something European and elegant. Just who had the storm blown into their lives? Morning arrived with lingering puddles and a sky washed clean. Sarah woke to Emma's excited voice from the kitchen, expecting to find their unexpected guest still there. Instead, she found her daughter holding a cream-colored note, the paper thick and expensive beneath her fingers. "Look what James left, Mom. And he made coffee before he went." Sarah took the note, noting the elegant handwriting that spoke of expensive. "Schooling. Dear Sarah and Emma, your kindness last night meant more than you could know. Sometimes the simplest gestures reveal the truest hearts. I've taken the liberty of brewing coffee. I hope you don't mind. Please accept my heartfelt thanks and this number where you can reach me. I would very much like to repay your hospitality properly." James below was a phone number, written with the same precise strokes. A business card was conspicuously absent, probably still lost to last night's storm. "Can we call him, Mum? Please?" Emma was practically bouncing, her school uniform already on, but slightly askew. "He promised to show me more math tricks." "Let's give it a few days, sweetie," Sarah said, though she carefully tucked the note into her purse. "He's probably very busy with his car and whatever it is he does." She poured herself a cup of the coffee he'd left and nearly gasped at the rich flavor. This wasn't their usual grocery store brand. The morning routine felt oddly empty without their guest. Emma chatted about James through breakfast, telling Sarah 3 times about how he'd explained reducing fractions using torn paper. Sarah smiled, but something nagged at her, little details that didn't quite add up about their mysterious visitor. As she walked Emma to school, Sarah noticed an unfamiliar black car parked across the street. The windows were tinted, but she could have sworn she saw someone raise a camera. By the time she looked again, the car was pulling away. Mrs. Mitchell. It was Mrs. Henderson from the building's first floor, hurrying toward them with a local newspaper clutched in her hand. "You'll never believe. There's a picture. They're saying he might be—" She stopped, glancing at Emma, then pressed her lips together. "Perhaps we could chat later." Sarah frowned but nodded, her curiosity piqued. She dropped Emma at school, where she immediately noticed more parents than usual glancing her way, whispering behind their hands. One mother actually approached her. Smartphone extended. "Sarah, is it true? Was he really at your apartment last night? There's this photo circulating." "Who?" Sarah asked, but the school bell rang before she could get a clear answer. She hurried to work, increasingly aware of odd looks and whispered conversations that stopped when she approached. At her desk in the accounting firm, Sarah finally had a moment to breathe. She reached for the note again, running her fingers over. The precise handwriting. On impulse, she pulled out her phone and Googled the number he'd left. No results. She tried variations of James and broken-down car with yesterday's date and their neighborhood. The first few results were normal local news, but then her breath caught. There was a photo, clearly taken through the rain, of a man in a soaked suit at her building's entrance. The timestamp matched last night, but the headline made her head spin. "Missing Prince spotted in local neighborhood." Sarah quickly closed the browser, her heart pounding. It couldn't be. She'd had dinner with him, watched him help with homework, seen him hold her grandmother's quilt with careful hands. A prince wouldn't, would he? Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "I imagine you may have some questions. I'd very much like to explain, if you're willing to meet." Sarah stared at the message, 1,000 thoughts racing through her mind. Through her office window she spotted another black car with tinted windows parked across the street. As she watched, a man with a professional camera emerged, looking up at her building. Her phone buzzed again. "I understand if you'd prefer not to. What happened last night was the first real moment of peace I've had in years. Thank you for that." Gift, however brief it was, Sarah found herself smiling despite her confusion. Prince or not, the man who'd sat at her kitchen table, who'd made her daughter laugh and treated them both with such genuine warmth, that had been real, hadn't it? With trembling fingers she typed a reply. "I think you owe me and Emma an explanation. And maybe a coffee as good as what you left this morning." The response came immediately. "Name the time and place." And Sarah, "I'm so sorry for not being entirely honest, though everything that mattered was true." Sarah chose a small cafe 3 blocks from her apartment, far enough from the media attention beginning to swirl around her building. She arrived early, Emma in tow. She'd debated leaving her with a neighbor, but something told her James would want to see them both. Her daughter's homework was spread across the table, though she was too excited to focus on it. "Do you think he'll show us more math tricks?" Emma asked for the 3rd time, fidgeting with her pencil. "And why are there so many people with cameras?" "Outside." Sarah was about to respond when movement near the door caught her attention. James entered quietly, wearing casual clothes that somehow looked more expensive than his rain-soaked suit. A newspaper tucked under his arm showed a blurry photo of their building's entrance. She caught a glimpse of the headline, "Royal Mystery," before he folded it away. "Sarah, Emma," he said warmly, though she noticed the tension in his shoulders. "Thank you for meeting me." He placed a small gift bag on the table. "A proper thank you for the quilt's warmth." Emma peered inside and gasped. "Mom, look! It's one of those fancy tea sets like in your magazines." She pulled out a delicate bone china cup, wrapped carefully in tissue paper. "James, this is too much," Sarah began, but he held up a hand. "Please, it's the least I can do, considering—" He glanced around the cafe, noting 2 men poorly disguising their interest behind newspapers. "I suppose you've seen the stories?" Sarah nodded slowly. "Though I'm having trouble believing them. A prince, really. Crown Prince James Augustus Matthias of Andalusia," he confirmed quietly, wincing slightly at the formal title. "Though I much and preferred being just James in your kitchen." Emma's eyes went wide. Like in fairy tales? Mum, we had a real prince eat spaghetti. James laughed, some of the tension leaving his face. And it was the best spaghetti I've ever had. Palace chefs could learn something from your mother's secret recipe. A flash from outside the window made Sarah jump. James's expression darkened. I'm so sorry about this. I never meant to bring this chaos into your lives. He traced the rim of his coffee cup. That night in the rain, I'd been trying to escape all of this, just for a moment. My security detail, the constant cameras, the pressure of... He gestured vaguely at the newspaper. And then you opened your door, and for a few hours I got to be normal. Do you know how precious that is? Sarah watched him carefully. In the daylight, she could see the weight he carried, not just his title, but the expectations that came with it. Why tell us now? You could have just disappeared. I could have, he agreed. But Emma's math homework wouldn't be finished. He smiled at the girl, who beamed back. And more importantly, I couldn't bear the thought of you finding out from the tabloids. You both treated me with such genuine kindness. You deserve the truth from me directly. More camera flashes from outside. James sighed, reaching into his jacket. My private number, he said, sliding a card across the table. Not the one I left this morning. That was my public office. This one, well, very few people have it. The card was simple white cardstock, but the raised royal crest in the corner caught the light. And what exactly are we supposed to do with the prince's private number? Sarah asked, trying to keep her tone light despite her racing heart. Use it, ignore it, it's your choice entirely. James leaned forward, his voice softening. I know this is overwhelming. The media attention will die down in a few days. Some celebrity will do something scandalous, and they'll forget all about the mysterious woman who took in a rain-soaked prince. But He hesitated, glancing at Emma, who was still admiring the tea set. I'd very much like to remain friends, if you're willing. Friends with a prince. Sarah couldn't help but laugh. Is that even allowed? I'm making it allowed, he said, with a flash of the authority he usually kept hidden. Unless you'd rather not. Before Sarah could respond, Emma piped up. Can you teach me more math? Mum's good at it, but you make it fun with all the paper tearing. James's face lit up. I would be honored to continue our mathematics lessons, Miss Emma. With your mother's permission, of course. Sarah looked between them. Her daughter's hopeful face, James's careful smile. Outside, another camera flashed. Their peaceful little world had already changed, whether she chose to continue this strange friendship or not, and something in James's eyes, that same longing for normalcy she'd seen in her kitchen, made her decision easier. Well, she said, picking up the royal business card, I suppose we could all use a friend, even if he happens to be a prince. The magazine lay open on Sarah's coffee table, its glossy pages showing a very different James than the one who'd sat in her kitchen. Crown Prince's Secret Life blazed across a spread of photos. James in military dress, James at state functions, James dancing with various elegant women at royal balls. The article painted a picture of a crown prince increasingly reluctant to fulfill his royal duties, disappearing for hours or days at a time. Mom, Emma called from the living room computer. I found videos of James. He speaks 4 languages and rides horses and everything. Homework first, Sarah reminded her, though she couldn't help glancing at the screen. There he was, giving a speech at some international conference, every inch the royal they now knew him to be. His voice carried that same warmth she remembered, but his posture was different, more rigid, more controlled. Her phone buzzed. James's private number. Is Emma still struggling with those fractions? His text read, I found some excellent visual exercises that might help. Sarah smiled despite herself. 3 days of casual texts about nothing and everything. He never mentioned the growing media circus, the photographers who still lingered near their building, the wild speculation in the tabloids about their relationship. She's actually doing better, Sarah replied, though she's currently more interested in your horse riding skills than mathematics. Ah, You've seen the videos then? Hard to avoid them. You never mentioned the whole modernizing the monarchy or campaign. There was a long pause before his response. I prefer being just James with you both. The prince thing tends to complicate matters. Sarah was about to reply when Emma called out again. Mom, my teacher asked if I knew Prince James. Everyone at school is talking about it. Reality crashed back in. Sarah set down her phone and went to her daughter, who was now surrounded by open browser tabs showing various articles about James. Honey, we need to talk about this. About James. Because he's a prince? Emma asked, looking up from a photo of James at some charity event. Because things might get a little complicated for a while. People might ask you questions or try to take your picture. Like those men outside school today? Sarah's heart stopped. What men? They had big cameras. My teacher made them leave. Emma turned back to the computer, seemingly unfazed. Can we invite James for dinner again? He said he'd show me how they do math in his country. Sarah's phone buzzed again. A news alert this time. Royal romance. Crown Prince James makes third visit to local neighborhood. Below was a grainy photo of James's car near their building yesterday. Another text from James arrived. I'm so sorry about the photographers at Emma's school. I've sent security to ensure they stay away. I never meant for this to affect her. Sarah sank onto the couch, suddenly overwhelmed. The magazine caught her eye again, and this time she read deeper into the article. It spoke of James's increasing resistance to traditional royal expectations, his advocacy for modernizing the monarchy, and, her heart skipped, his recent breaking of an arranged engagement to a duchess. The Crown Prince's unconventional choices, the article read, have caused concern among traditionalists in the palace. Sources close to the royal family suggest that his recent disappearances and reluctance to follow protocol may stem from a deeper dissatisfaction with his predetermined path. After breaking his engagement to Duchess Eleanor, many wonder if Prince James is deliberately seeking a different kind of life, and perhaps a different kind of love. Her phone buzzed one final time. May I come by? There are some things we should discuss, and I'd rather do it in person, where I can be just James again. Sarah looked at Emma, happily clicking through photos of castles and royal events, then at the magazine with its speculation and rumours. Finally, she glanced at her grandmother's quilt, still neatly folded where James had left it that rainy night. Your security won't let anyone bother Emma, she texted back. You have my word. Though I understand if you'd rather not continue this friendship, the media attention will only get worse before it gets better. Sarah thought of his smile when he'd helped Emma with her homework, the way he'd looked at peace in their simple kitchen, how he kept reaching out about math problems, as an excuse to stay connected. Come over, she wrote. Emma's been practicing fractions, and I think we both need some honest answers. His reply was immediate. On my way. And Sarah, thank you for still seeing me as just James. It means more than you know. James arrived without fanfare, though Sarah noticed the discreet black SUV that remained parked at the corner, his security detail, she assumed. He wore casual clothes again, but this time she recognized the subtle signs of his status. The perfect tailoring, the handmade leather shoes, and most notably, a signet ring he'd previously kept hidden. I thought it was time for complete honesty, he said, noticing her glance at the ring. He slipped it off and handed it to her. The royal crest caught the light, generations of history captured in gold and craftsmanship. This ring has been worn by every crown prince of Andalusia for 300 years. James, Emma bounded out of her room, homework in hand. I got an A on my fractions test. His formal demeanor melted instantly. Did you? That's absolutely brilliant. He knelt to examine her paper, and Sarah watched the prince disappear again, replaced by the man who'd sought shelter from the rain. Emma, sweetie, Sarah said gently, why don't you show James your test in the kitchen while I make some tea, with the special cups he gave us? Once Emma was happily setting up the tea set, Sarah turned to James. You said we needed to talk. He nodded, his expression growing serious. The media attention is going to get worse. My father, the king, he's asked me to return home and make a formal statement about, he gestured vaguely between them, about having dinner with a commoner. Sarah tried to keep her tone light, but something in his eyes made her heart skip. About finding something real, he said quietly. Sarah, I need to tell you why I was really out in the rain that night. From his jacket he pulled a folded newspaper clipping. The headline read, Crown Prince James abandons royal duties, breaks engagement to Duchess Eleanor. I didn't just break an engagement, he explained. I broke. With centuries of tradition, Eleanor was chosen for me when we were children. The perfect political match, uniting two royal houses. But I couldn't. He ran a hand through his hair, a surprisingly human gesture. I couldn't keep pretending that duty was enough. So you ran away? Sarah asked, understanding beginning. To dawn. I've been running for months. Small escapes at first, disappearing for hours, then days. My security team grew quite frustrated. He smiled faintly. That night in the rain, my car really did break down. But I'd already ditched my regular driver, trying to find something, some proof that there was more to life than arranged marriages and political alliances. And you found our doorstep. I found more than that. His voice softened. I found a home where math homework matters more than military parades, where a family quilt holds more meaning than royal tapestries, where a little girl's smile is worth more than all the formal bows I've ever received. From the kitchen came the sound of Emma humming as she arranged cookies on one of the fancy plates. James, Sarah began, but he held up a hand. Please, let me finish. Tomorrow the papers will run stories about us. They'll call it a fairy tale, the prince and the commoner. They'll dig into your life, Emma's life. They'll make assumptions and predictions. But before any of that happens, I need you to know the truth. He reached into his pocket and withdrew the rain-soaked business card from that first night, somehow preserved. I keep this as a reminder. The ink ran, obscuring my title, my family name, everything that usually defines me. For one evening, I was just James, welcome at your table, useful for homework help, warmed by your grandmother's quilt. And I've never felt more myself. What are you saying? Sarah asked, though her heart was racing. I'm saying that I'm tired of running, but I'm also tired of living behind titles and traditions. My father wants me to return to fulfill my duties, to find another suitable match, and I will return, but not to be the prince they want me to be. If you're willing, I'd like to return as the man who found himself on your doorstep. Mom, Emma called from the kitchen. The tea's ready. James smiled at the interruption. Perfect timing as always. He stood, offering Sarah his hand. Shall we have tea with your daughter while I tell you both about my plans to modernize? 1,000 years of royal tradition. I warn you, it may involve more improper dinner invitations and math lessons. Sarah looked at his offered hand, then at the signet ring still sitting on her coffee table. You know this is crazy, right? Princesses and commoners, that only happens in fairy tales. Perhaps, he said, his eyes twinkling, it's time to write a new kind of fairy tale, one with fraction homework and secret spaghetti recipes. From the kitchen, Emma called again, and Sarah found herself taking his hand. Well, she said, I suppose every fairy tale has to start somewhere. Why not with a rainy night and a borrowed quilt? The first official photos appeared in every major newspaper the next morning. Crown Prince's commoner romance splashed across. The front pages, accompanied by images of their first public outing, Sarah, Emma, and James at the Central Park Zoo. What the photos couldn't capture was the careful planning that had gone into making that simple family day possible. The photographers will be there anyway, James had explained while helping Emma tie her shoes that morning. Better to let them get their shots on our terms. He dressed down deliberately, designer jeans and a casual sweater that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly rent, but still a far cry from his usual formal attire. Sarah had been nervous, but Emma's excitement was contagious. "Can we see the penguins first?" she'd asked, bouncing in the back seat of James's security vehicle. "Do princesses like penguins?" "I wouldn't know about princesses," James had replied with a wink at Sarah, "but princes certainly do." Now, looking at the photos, Sarah could see why the media was having a field day. They looked natural, happy. There was James, Crown Prince of Andalasia, buying ice cream from a cart. Another shot caught him lifting Emma onto his shoulders for a better view of the giraffes. But it was the candid photo that made Sarah's breath catch. James looking at her while she laughed at something Emma had said, his expression unguarded and tender. Her phone buzzed with yet another message from her boss. "Taking another day off. The clients are asking questions about the photos." Work had become complicated. Her quiet job in accounting suddenly felt precarious as clients either avoided her or tried to pump her for information about James. She'd overheard whispers, "In the break room, gold digger and won't last," and poor Emma caught up in all this. "You know we'll have to address it officially soon," James said that evening after Emma had gone to bed. They sat on Sarah's small balcony, the security detail's presence marked by subtle movements in the shadows below. "The palace press office is already preparing statements. What exactly does one say in a royal press statement?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her tone light. "Local accountant not actually trying to steal the crown?" James didn't smile. "They want to know my intentions. The Royal Council is meeting tomorrow. There's talk of—" He hesitated. "They're discussing the succession." "The succession? You mean if I'm serious about you, about us, there will be consequences? Questions about Emma's future role, about your background, about whether the people will accept a queen who knows more about tax law than tea ceremonies." Sarah's head spun. "Queen? James, we haven't even—" He reached for her hand, his touch gentle. "I know it's too much, too fast, but my position doesn't allow for casual dating or normal relationship progression. The media, the palace, the people, they'll all want answers." As if to prove his point, a camera flash went off from a neighboring building. James's security team immediately moved to investigate, but the damage was done. Another intimate moment turned into tomorrow's headlines. "And what answers do you want to give them?" Sarah asked quietly. James pulled out his phone, showing her a draft of the palace's proposed statement. It was formal, distant, acknowledging his friendship with Ms. Mitchell and her daughter, while emphasizing his commitment to royal duties and traditions. "This is what they want me to say," he said, then deleted the draft. "But what I want to tell them is that I'm falling in love with a woman who cares more about her daughter's math grades than my title, that I'm learning more about real leadership from watching you balance work and motherhood than I ever did in palace etiquette classes, that Emma's honest questions about the world make more sense than 100 diplomatic briefings." Another camera flash, another moment captured for public consumption. But Sarah barely noticed this time, her heart too busy processing his words. "Love?" she whispered. "Too fast?" he asked, his confident prince persona slipping to reveal the uncertain man beneath. Before she could answer, her phone lit up with a breaking news alert. "Royal Council convenes. Crown Prince's romance threatens traditional succession." Below was a photo from today at the zoo, but the caption twisted their happy moment into something scandalous. "Prince James abandons royal protocol for controversial relationship with single mother." James saw the alert and his jaw tightened. "I should have known they'd make the first move. Sarah, whatever happens next, please remember, you and Emma are not stepping into my world. I'm fighting to create a new one where both our worlds can exist together." The truth hung between them, heavy as a crown. Their simple fairy tale was about to become a royal battle. The letter arrived on expensive stationery, bearing a royal crest Sarah had come to recognize. Unlike James's warm notes, this one radiated cold formality. "Dear Ms. Mitchell," it began, "in light of recent developments, the Royal Office of Protocol wishes to address certain concerns regarding your association with Crown Prince James." She couldn't finish reading. The stack of similar letters on her coffee table, some supportive, many hostile, had grown over the past week. Gold digger, social climber, unfit mother. The accusations blurred together. One particularly venomous note had included old photos from her college days, with a threat to release them to the media. "Mom?" Emma's voice pulled her from dark thoughts. "Can I switch classes?" Sarah's heart sank. "Is someone bothering you again?" Emma shrugged, trying to appear brave despite her trembling lip. "Jessica said I can't sit with them anymore because her mom says I'm trying to act better than everyone else, and the boys keep calling me princess, but not in a nice way." Before Sarah could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from James. "Turn on the news." The TV sprang to life with a press conference outside the royal palace. A stern-faced woman in a designer suit was addressing reporters. While His Royal Highness's personal life is his own affair, the matter of succession and appropriate royal connections must be considered. The Royal Council strongly advises... Sarah muted it, pulling Emma close. "I'm so sorry, baby. This isn't what I wanted for us, but I like James," Emma said simply. "He makes you smile, and he knows all the best math tricks." Sarah's phone buzzed again. "Don't listen to Victoria. She's my father's PR director and hasn't had an original thought in decades. Are you both free tonight?" "Shouldn't you be at that press conference?" "I'm exactly where I need to be, on my way to help a brilliant young lady with her math homework, and perhaps to remind her mother that the best fairy tales are worth fighting for." Despite everything, Sarah smiled. But her response was interrupted by a call from her boss. "Sarah, we need to discuss your position. Clients are expressing concerns." The evening found them in Sarah's kitchen, an attempt at normalcy despite the cameras that occasionally flashed from neighboring buildings. James had arrived with a small army of security personnel who now guarded the building's perimeter. He sat with Emma at the table, their heads bent over her homework, while Sarah prepared dinner. "The square of the hypotenuse," he was explaining, "is equal to the sum of squares of the other two sides. But here's a secret way to remember it." A sharp knock at the door made them all jump. James's security chief appeared, looking grave. "Your Highness, the King is requesting your immediate return. The Council has called an emergency session." James's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Emma spoke up. "Can't they do their meeting without you? We're learning about triangles." The security chief looked scandalized, but James laughed, a real warm laugh that cut through the tension. You know what, Emma? You're absolutely right." He turned to his chief. "Tell my father I'm engaged in matters of geometric importance. I'll address the council tomorrow." After the chief left, Sarah gave James a worried look. "Won't you get in trouble?" "Undoubtedly. But they need to understand something." He pulled out his phone, showing them a draft of a statement he'd written. "I'm releasing this tomorrow. It's time everyone knew exactly where I stand." Sarah read it, her eyes widening. "James, this would change everything." "That's rather the point." He smiled, though she could see the weight of his decision in his eyes. "The monarchy needs to evolve, and sometimes evolution requires a catalyst." He glanced at Emma, still focused on her triangles. "Or two catalysts. You'd risk everything for us?" "No," he said softly. "I risk losing everything by not fighting for what matters. My father built his reign on tradition and protocol. I want to build mine on something real." Emma looked up from her homework. "Does this mean you'll be here for the science fair next week?" "I'm doing an experiment about rain and probability." James met Sarah's eyes over their daughter's head. In that moment, surrounded by homework and cooking smells and the simple warmth of family, the choice seemed clearer than ever. Wouldn't miss it for all the royal councils in the world, he said, and Sarah knew he meant it. Outside, cameras continued to flash, capturing fragments of their evening. But they couldn't capture what mattered. The way James explained math with infinite patience, how Emma's laughter filled the small apartment, the quiet understanding that passed between Sarah and James as they built something new, something real, something worth fighting for. The formal invitation arrived on cream-colored cardstock, embossed with gold leaf and bearing the royal seal. Their Majesties, King Edward and Queen Helena, request the presence of Ms. Sarah Mitchell and Miss Emma Mitchell at the Royal Palace of Andalusia. The date was set for 3 days hence. No room for preparation, Sarah realized. That was probably intentional. Do I have to wear a fancy dress? Emma asked, running her fingers over the embossed letters. Like in the movies? Sarah looked at James, who had delivered the invitation personally. He smiled apologetically. The palace will send over suitable attire, though I did convince them that tiaras weren't necessary. The suitable attire arrived the next morning, couture dresses that probably cost more than Sarah's annual salary. Emma twirled in her pale blue gown, enchanted. Sarah stared at her own reflection in deep green silk, feeling like an imposter. Remember, James coached them as the royal car approached the palace gates. Just be yourselves. That's what I love about you both. Emma pressed her face to the window, gasping at the grandeur. Sarah's stomach churned. This was James's world, the world he'd been trying to escape that rainy night. Now she understood why. The palace entrance hall gleamed with marble and gold. Footmen in livery bowed as they passed. Emma whispered, "Mom, it's just like in my books." But Sarah noticed how the servants' eyes followed them, assessing, judging. They were led to a sitting room larger than their entire apartment. Queen Helena rose to greet them, every inch the royal matriarch in her perfectly tailored suit. King Edward remained seated, his expression unreadable. "So," the Queen said, after they'd been served tea in priceless china cups, "you're the ones who've captured our James's attention." "I helped capture him," Emma announced proudly. "He was all wet from the rain, and Mom gave him our special quilt." A flicker of something, amusement, dismay, crossed the Queen's face. "Indeed. And tell me, dear, what do you know about royal protocol?" "I know James doesn't like it very much," Emma replied honestly. "He says real connections are more important than fancy rules." The king's teacup clattered against its saucer. "James says many things lately, things that concern us greatly." "Father," James warned, but the king continued, "our son was raised to understand duty, responsibility, the weight of 1,000 years of tradition. Yet lately he seems more interested in mathematics, homework." "Edward," the Queen murmured, but Sarah had had enough. "With all due respect, Your Majesty," she said, surprising herself with her steady voice, "those mathematics lessons have taught Emma more about dedication and patience than any tradition I know. James may be your crown prince, but he's also a wonderful teacher and friend." The room fell silent. Emma reached for Sarah's hand under the table, squeezing it tight. The king rose, towering over them. "Miss Mitchell, do you have any idea what you're disrupting? The alliances that have been carefully cultivated, the expectations of an entire nation." "Father," James stood as well, "this isn't a diplomatic negotiation. This is my life. Our lives, which belong to the crown." "No," James said quietly, his voice carrying the authority Sarah had glimpsed before. "My duty belongs to the crown. My life belongs to those I choose to share it with." Emma suddenly pulled a folded paper from her dress pocket. "I drew this for you," she said, offering it to the stunned king. "It's my family. See, there's Mom and me and James helping me with homework. And I left space for you and the Queen, if you want to be in it too." Sarah's heart stopped as the king stared at the crayon drawing. For a moment, his stern facade cracked, revealing something softer underneath. The queen moved to look over his shoulder, her perfectly composed expression wavering. "You drew us all together?" the queen asked softly. "Well, yeah," Emma said. "Isn't that what families do, even if some of them are kings and queens?" James crossed to stand behind Sarah's chair, his hand finding her shoulder. The gesture wasn't lost on his parents. "You truly care for them," the queen said. "It wasn't a question." "More than anything," James replied. "Enough to fight for change. Enough to believe that modernizing the monarchy doesn't mean destroying it. It means making room for real love, real connections." The king looked between them, then back at Emma's drawing. "Perhaps," he said finally, "we should discuss these in changes you propose over dinner." It wasn't acceptance, not yet. But as Emma beamed and the queen tried to hide a smile, Sarah felt James relax behind her. Sometimes she realized the first step toward changing tradition was as simple as a child's drawing, showing the world not as it was, but as it could be. Emma's latest drawing hung proudly on Sarah's refrigerator, right next to her perfect math test. The crayon illustration showed their growing family in a unique blend of ordinary and royal life. Sarah cooking in a crown, James helping Emma with homework while wearing his formal military uniform, and the king and queen sitting at their small kitchen table with teacups and cookies. "It's my perfect family," Emma had explained. "See, everyone fits." The reality wasn't quite as seamless as Emma's artwork suggested, but they were trying. James had started spending more evenings at their apartment, learning the rhythms of normal family life. Tonight, he stood at the kitchen counter, sleeves rolled up, attempting to help with dinner. "I've commanded military operations," he muttered, frowning at the recipe on Sarah's tablet, "but this sauce refuses to thicken properly." Sarah hip-bumped him away from the stove. "That's because you keep stirring it like you're afraid it'll report you to the palace." She demonstrated the proper technique, and James watched with the same intensity he usually reserved for state documents. "Mom," Emma called from the living room, "can you help me practice my science fair presentation?" "Go," James said, taking the spoon from Sarah. "I think I've mastered the art of sauce stirring. Though if I ruin dinner, we can always call the palace chef." Sarah kissed his cheek. "No royal interventions in my kitchen, Your Highness." In the living room, Emma had set up her project, the mathematics of rainfall, how weather patterns affect our daily lives. The irony of the topic wasn't lost on any of them. "So," Emma began, pointing to her charts, "I collected data about rainy days and good things that happened, like how if it hadn't rained that night, James wouldn't have needed our quilt, and then we wouldn't have our new family." From the kitchen, James called out, "I believe that proves a positive correlation between precipitation and happiness." Emma beamed. "See, Mom, James gets it." Later, after Emma had gone to bed and the dishes were done, James insisted on helping. Despite his clear unfamiliarity with the dishwasher, they sat on the small balcony. The security detail remained discreetly in the shadows below, but they'd grown used to their constant presence. "The Royal Council meets tomorrow," James said, quietly. "They're voting on my proposal for modernizing succession rules and royal protocols." Sarah squeezed his hand. "Your father's supporting it?" "Surprisingly, yes. Though I suspect Emma's drawing had more influence than all my formal presentations." He smiled. "She has a way of making complicated things simple." "Speaking of complicated," Sarah hesitated. "Your mother called today. She wants to take Emma shopping for appropriate royal event attire." James tensed slightly. "You don't have to say yes. I know she can be overwhelming." "Actually, I said yes." Sarah looked out at the city lights. "Emma's so excited. And your mother? She's trying in her own way. She even asked about coming to the science fair." "The Queen at a primary school science fair," James chuckled. "That would certainly make headlines. Better headlines than we've been getting lately. They both thought of the morning's tabloids, Crown Prince domesticated, alongside photos of James carrying Emma's backpack into school. You know what? Those are exactly the headlines we need. James sat up straighter, his eyes bright with that look he got when forming policy decisions. Let them see this is real. Let them see a monarchy that values family dinners and science fairs as much as state dinners and royal balls. You really think people will accept that? They already are. Did you see the letters Emma got from other kids at school? They're not calling her princess mockingly anymore. They're asking for help with math. Sarah smiled, remembering Emma proudly showing off her math club president badge. Somehow, her daughter had turned her connection to James into a way to help other students. We're building something new, James continued. Not just us, but a new way of thinking about royalty, about duty, about family. He pulled out his phone, showing Sarah a draft of his speech for tomorrow's council meeting. I'm proposing quarterly open forums where citizens can directly address the royal family and mandatory community service for all royal household members. The guard will hate that? Good. James grinned. Change isn't supposed to be comfortable, but look what we've already accomplished. He gestured through the window where Emma's drawing hung on the fridge. Its crayon figures bridging two worlds that had seemed impossibly far apart just months ago. Sarah leaned against him, feeling the steady beat of his heart. Emma was right. You know, everyone does fit. It just took some rearranging. And a little rain, James added softly, pulling her closer. Above them, clouds gathered, promising another storm. But this time, they weren't afraid of getting wet. The tabloid headlines screamed across every newsstand in the city. Royal scandal, the truth about Sarah Mitchell's past. Beneath were old college photos, private emails and financial records, all twisted into a narrative of calculated social climbing. The source was clear. Someone inside the palace had leaked Sarah's background check to the press. Sarah's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Her boss had left 3 voicemails, each more urgent than the last. The final one was clear. Take a leave of absence. Paid, of course, but our clients are concerned about discretion. Emma's school had called too. The media presence had become disruptive to the learning environment. They suggested remote learning until things settle down. They can't do this, James said, pacing Sarah's living room. He'd arrived the moment the story broke, but even his presence couldn't stop the walls from closing in. I'll have them shut down the tabloids, issue retractions, and prove them right? Sarah's voice cracked. Show everyone I'm using you to fight my battles? Mom. Emma stood in her doorway, clutching her tablet. Why are the kids in my online class saying mean things about you in the chat? Before Sarah could respond, James's security chief appeared at the door. Your Highness, the King demands your immediate presence. The Royal Council has convened an emergency session. James ran a hand through his hair, torn between duty and love. I can't leave now. Go, Sarah said quietly. This is exactly what they want. To prove I'm a distraction from your responsibilities. You're not a distraction, you're my future. Your Highness, the security chief pressed, the succession is being discussed. The word hung heavy in the air. Succession, the very foundation of monarchy. James's face hardened into the mask of the Crown Prince. I'll fix this, he promised, kissing Sarah quickly. All of it. But he couldn't fix the emails that flooded Sarah's inbox, messages from other parents, from her colleagues, from strangers who felt entitled to judge her life. One particularly vicious message attached more photos, threatening to release them unless she did the right thing and stopped staining the royal family. Emma curled up on the couch, her science fair project forgotten. Maybe if I stop going to school for a while. No. Sarah's voice was firm despite her breaking heart. We don't let bullies win, remember? Her phone buzzed with a news alert. Royal Council deliberates. Crown Prince's relationship threatens traditional monarchy. The accompanying photo showed James entering the palace, his face set in grim lines. Hours passed. Emma finally fell asleep. On the couch, clutching the fancy teacup James had given her. Sarah sat in the darkness, watching reporters gather outside their building despite the late hour. Just past midnight, James returned. One look at his face told her everything. "They gave me an ultimatum," he said, his voice hollow. "Either I take my place as Crown Prince, following all traditional protocols, including approved royal matches, or you lose your birthright. They can't technically prevent my succession, but they can make it impossible, control the privy purse, block my initiatives, isolate me from any real power." He knelt before her chair. "But I don't care. We'll figure something out, Your Highness." The security chief appeared again, tablet in hand. "The first reports are running." They looked at the breaking news together. "Crown Prince defies council. Succession crisis looms." Below was a photo of James and Emma at her school, both laughing over some shared joke. The caption read, "Sources question the Crown Prince's judgment as he chooses commoner's child over royal duty." "They're dragging Emma into this," Sarah whispered. "My baby. I won't let them." "No." Sarah stood, her decision crystallizing. "This has to stop. Your father was right. You have responsibilities, a destiny. I'm just the woman who gave you shelter from the rain. This fairy tale, it was never meant to last." "Sarah, please. Look what we're doing to Emma, to your family, to the stability of your entire country." She fought back tears. "Sometimes love isn't enough. It's everything," James insisted. But they both heard the palace cars arriving. Outside, come to escort him to another emergency session, Sarah touched his cheek one last time. "Go. Be the prince your people need. Emma and we'll be okay." "Sarah, please," she whispered. "Just go." She watched from the window as he left, shoulders bent under the weight of duty. On the coffee table, Emma's tablet lit up with another news alert. "Royal romance ends. Crown Prince returns to tradition." The fairy tale was over. Reality, cold and harsh as the rain that had started it all, poured down outside. 2 weeks felt like 2 years. Sarah kept the unsent letters in her bedside drawer, each one beginning differently but ending the same way, unfinished, unsent, unable to bridge the gulf between them. Some were angry. How dare they judge me without knowing me? Others pleading, "Emma asks about you every day." But most were simply honest. "I miss the way you made ordinary moments feel magical." The media circus had moved on to newer scandals, but its aftermath lingered. Emma's remote learning continued, though her grades in math had slipped significantly. "It's not the same without James explaining it," she'd say, pushing away her homework. Sarah watched the royal news despite herself. James had returned to his duties with rigid precision, attending state functions, meeting diplomats, reviewing troops. But she noticed what others might miss. The slight slump in his shoulders, the way his diplomatic smile never reached his. Eyes, how he'd absently touch his signet ring during formal events, as if remembering simpler times. One morning, Emma found the royal family's latest official portrait in the newspaper. "Mum, look, James isn't smiling, not really." Sarah studied the photo. Emma was right. Surrounded by opulent decorations and wearing his full military regalia, James looked every inch the crown prince. But his eyes held a sadness she recognized from her own mirror. That evening, after Emma was asleep, Sarah pulled out her latest unfinished letter. "Dear James, today I heard Emma teaching her stuffed animals about triangles, using your method. She said Mr. Bear was having trouble with geometry, just like she did before you came. Before you made math feel like magic and life feel like a fairy tale. I keep telling myself we did the right thing. That love sometimes means letting go. That your duty to your country matters more than homework help or family dinners or the way you looked at me when you thought no one was watching. But then I see you on TV, playing your royal role perfectly. And I remember what you said about being most yourself in our tiny kitchen. I wonder if we got it all wrong. If maybe duty isn't about following old rules, but about being brave enough to write new ones." A knock at the door startled her. Instead of James, as her heart foolishly hoped, she found a palace messenger with an official envelope. Inside was an invitation to Emma's science fair, addressed to the king and queen. "Emma sent it last week," the messenger explained. "Her Royal Majesty asked me to inform you that they plan to attend." Sarah sank onto the couch, invitation trembling in her hands. She remembered James's mother's words about appropriate royal events and realized Emma had taken them literally. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "She gets her cleverness from you. Helena, the Queen," using a private number to text her. Sarah's world had become surreal again. Another buzz. "Edward keeps the drawing in his study. Won't admit it, but looks at it daily." The drawing. Emma's crayon masterpiece of their blended family. Sarah glanced at her own copy, still proudly displayed on the fridge despite everything. A final text. "James proposed changes to succession laws today. The council is disturbed, but perhaps that's not entirely bad." Sarah started a dozen responses but sent none. What could she say to a queen about her son's broken heart? About her own? Late that night, unable to sleep, Sarah found Emma in the kitchen, studying their family photo from the zoo. "I figured it out," her daughter announced. "Figured what out, sweetheart?" "In fairy tales, the prince always has to face a big test to prove his love is real. Maybe this is James's test." Sarah touched the photo gently. "Real life isn't a fairy tale, Emma. But that's what makes it better, right? In fairy tales, the princess just waits in her tower. But we're not waiting. We're living and working and trying to be brave. And maybe James is too, in his own way." From Emma's room came the soft glow of her nightlight, a small crown that James had given her to keep the shadows away. Sarah thought of his words that last night. "Love is everything." She pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began a new letter, this one different from all the others. "Dear James, Emma taught me something tonight about tests and towers and being brave. About how real love isn't about waiting for rescue or following rules. It's about fighting for what matters, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. I don't know if you'll ever read this, but if you do, know that we're not in a tower waiting. We're right here, living and loving and believing that sometimes the truest fairy tales are the ones we have to fight to write ourselves." This time, she signed it. This time, she wrote an address. This time, maybe she'd be brave enough to send it. The document that would change everything landed on front pages across the world. Royal Reformation. Crown Prince proposes historic changes to monarchy. James had done it. He'd actually done it. A comprehensive proposal to modernize the royal family, from succession rights to public engagement. Sarah read it over breakfast, her coffee growing cold as she absorbed each point. The legal language was dense, but the intent was clear, dismantling centuries of rigid tradition while preserving the monarchy's core values. Public service requirements for all royal family members, regular open forums with citizens, and most significantly, new guidelines for royal marriages that emphasized character and commitment over titles and bloodlines. "Is that James on TV?" Emma asked, pointing to the morning news. There he stood at a podium, looking both royal and revolutionary as he addressed the press. "The monarchy must evolve," he was saying, his voice steady and sure. "True nobility lies not in birth or title, but in how we serve others, how we love, how we face challenges. I've learned this from—" He paused, his composure cracking slightly. "From those who showed me that real strength often comes in the simplest moments." Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from the Queen. "He's been working on this since the day you left. Barely sleeps. The council is in chaos." Another buzz. "Edward is pretending to be furious." But he smiled when James quoted his own coronation speech about adapting to serve the people. The proposal was causing waves throughout society. Conservative papers called it radical and destructive. Progressive ones praised its vision. But it was the public's reaction that truly surprised everyone. Thousands gathered outside the palace, many holding signs that read, "Love over protocol," and "Real fairy tales need real change." Emma's science fair was scheduled for that afternoon. Sarah helped her set up her rainfall project, trying not to think about whether the king and queen would actually attend, trying harder not to hope for James. "Look at all the patterns," Emma explained to her classmates, pointing to her charts. "Sometimes the biggest storms bring the best changes." A murmur went through the crowd. Sarah turned to find the king and queen entering the school gymnasium, surrounded by discreet security, but making an obvious effort to appear approachable. The queen wore a casual suit rather than her usual formal attire, while the king had foregone his medals for a simple tie. "Miss Emma," the queen said warmly, "we wouldn't miss this for the world. Now tell us about your hypothesis." As Emma launched into her presentation, Sarah noticed the king studying the project with genuine interest. "Fascinating correlation between precipitation and life-changing events," he mused. "Rather apt, wouldn't you say, my dear?" The queen squeezed his hand. "Indeed, some might call it a sign." "Mom!" Emma suddenly called out. "Look who else came to see my project." Sarah's heart stopped. There was James, standing in the gymnasium doorway, still in his formal suit from the press conference. But he wasn't looking at Emma's project. He was looking at Sarah, with eyes that held both apology and hope. He crossed to them slowly, the crowd parting instinctively. "I hope I'm not too late," he said softly. "There's an old saying in our family about never missing moments that matter." "James!" Emma launched herself at him. "Did you see my charts? I proved that rain really does bring good luck." "I saw them." He hugged her tight, then met Sarah's eyes over her head. "Your daughter's quite the scientist. She sees patterns others, misunderstands that sometimes the biggest changes start with a single drop of rain." The king cleared his throat. "Son, your proposal, it's causing quite a stir." "Yes," James said, still looking at Sarah. "I learned that sometimes stirring things up is the only way to let the truth settle where it belongs." "And where is that?" Sarah found herself asking. "Wherever love is real," he answered simply. "Wherever math homework matters more than protocol. Wherever family means more than titles." The queen touched Sarah's arm gently. "We've been quite blind, haven't we? Seeing only what tradition told us to see, rather than what was right before us." "The council will fight this," the king warned, but he was smiling slightly. "Let them," James said. "Some things are worth fighting for." He reached for Sarah's hand. "That is, if you're willing to help me write a new kind of fairy tale. One, with science fairs and rainy nights and proof that love really can change the world." Around them, students and parents watched with held breath, witnesses to history being rewritten in a simple school gymnasium. Emma's project lights blinked steadily, tracking patterns of change and hope. Sarah looked at their joined hands, at Emma's beaming face, at the king and queen's quiet acceptance. "Well," she said, "I do have some experience with storms bringing unexpected blessings." The papers lay on the palace conference table, official renunciation documents prepared by the royal council as their last attempt to force James's hand. "Sign these," they'd said, "or abandon this foolish reformation." He'd taken the papers, but not for the reason they'd expected. James sat in Sarah's living room, the documents spread before them. Emma was asleep in her room, exhausted from her science fair triumph, still clutching the special ribbon the Queen had pinned to her project. "You can't give up your birthright," Sarah protested, staring at the renunciation papers. "Your whole life, your destiny, is right here," James finished. "With you, with Emma, with the chance to show that real leadership means having the courage to change. The council gave me exactly what I needed." He smiled, pulling out another document from his briefcase. "My father's lawyers found an interesting precedent. In 1892, a crown prince threatened to renounce his claim. The council, terrified of succession crisis, offered a compromise. They gave him the power to modify royal law. Sarah's eyes widened. So by threatening you with renunciation, they accidentally gave me the legal grounds to force their hand. He touched the Reformation proposal. Everything in here becomes binding the moment they accept it, and they'll accept it because the alternative is losing you completely. Sarah finished, understanding dawning. The council forgets something crucial about monarchy, James said softly. Its power doesn't come from tradition, it comes from the people, and the people... He showed her his phone, filled with messages of support, photos of crowds still gathered. Outside the palace. They're ready for change. A small voice came from the hallway. Does this mean you're staying? They turned to find Emma in her doorway, hair mussed from sleep. James opened his arms, and she ran to him. That depends, he said, holding her close. I hear there's a position open for a royal math tutor. Though I should warn you, the pay is mostly in hugs. And what about Mom? Emma asked with a child's directness. Do you still love her? More than ever, James answered, meeting Sarah's eyes. Even when we were apart, I never stopped. Every royal duty, every formal event, I kept thinking how much more meaningful it would be with you both there. Not because you'd make it grander, but because you'd make it real. Sarah touched the renunciation papers. You'd really give it all up, just like that? No, James said firmly. Not just like that. For love, for family, for the chance to show that monarchy can be both traditional and human, both dutiful and real. He pulled out one final document, his formal response to the council. But I don't think I'll have to. Sometimes the threat of walking away is enough to make people realize what really matters. Emma yawned against his shoulder. Like in my science project. Sometimes you have to shake things up to make them better. Exactly like that, James smiled. Your daughter is quite wise, Miss Mitchell. Our daughter, Sarah found herself saying. The words felt right, natural, true. James's breath caught. Carefully settling Emma on the couch, he knelt before Sarah's chair, taking her hands in his. I should have done this months ago, before the pressure and protocols complicated everything, when it was just us, a rainy night and a borrowed quilt. From his pocket he drew not a ring, but a simple key. This isn't a fairy tale proposal with grand gestures and royal proclamations. This is me, James, asking if you and Emma would help me make a home, one where math homework matters more than military parades, where family dinner takes priority over state dinners, where love isn't about titles or traditions, but about choosing each other every day. But what about being crown prince? Sarah asked, though her fingers closed around the key. I'll still be crown prince, and someday king, but I'll be those things my way, our way. The council can either accept that or... He gestured at the renunciation papers. Well, there's always math tutoring. Emma stirred on the couch. Can we have pancakes for breakfast? Real princes should know how to make pancakes, James laughed, the sound full and free. I suppose that's my first royal lesson then. Sarah looked at the key in her hand, at Emma's sleepy smile, at James's eyes full of love and certainty. Outside, a gentle rain began to fall. Not a storm this time, but a soft spring shower full of promise. Yes, she said simply. Yes to pancakes, James teased. Yes to everything. To math lessons and modern monarchy. To rainy nights and new traditions. To writing our own kind of fairy tale. James gathered them both close, and for a moment the crown prince, the single mom, and the little girl who believed in rain brought. Magic was simply a family, holding on to their own perfect happy beginning. The house keys jingled in Sarah's hand as they stood before their new home. Not a palace, but not her small apartment either. A comfortable compromise, a townhouse with enough room for family dinners and homework sessions, yet secure enough for a crown prince's residence. Welcome home, James said, watching Emma race up the steps. The moving van behind them contained an odd mix of their lives. Sarah's grandmother's quilt, James's official portraits, Emma's school projects, and diplomatic gifts from around the world. "Your security team must hate this," Sarah commented, noting the discreet but present guards at strategic points around the property. "Actually, they're thrilled. Much easier to secure than your apartment building with its 17 different entry points," he grinned, though they're still adjusting to doing background checks on Emma's playdate friends. Inside, Emma had already claimed her room. "Mom, James, look! I can see my school from here." She pressed her face against the window of what would become her study space, complete with the math-learning tools James had specially designed. Sarah wandered into the kitchen, spacious but not opulent, perfect for family meals and teaching a certain prince how to cook. James had insisted on installing the appliances himself, though his idea of helping mostly involved reading installation manuals with intense concentration, while professional craftsmen did the actual work. "The media's calling it your common touch," Sarah teased, showing him the latest headline: "Crown Prince demonstrates modern monarchy, royal moves into family home." "Let them talk," James said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Though, I admit, Father's face when I told him I was learning to make pancakes was priceless." "Speaking of your father," Sarah nodded toward the formal living room where the king's wedding gift sat, a centuries-old tapestry depicting the royal family tree. Beside it, in deliberate contrast, hung Emma's science fair project. "He's trying," James said softly. "They both are. Mother's already planning Emma's first royal etiquette lesson, though I suspect our daughter will end up teaching her a thing or two about modern protocol." "Our daughter," Sarah repeated, still marveling at how natural those words felt. Their moment was interrupted by Emma's shout from upstairs. "Can I hang the special picture in my room?" The special picture was the official photo from James's Reformation announcement, but not the formal pose that had run in papers. This was a candid shot. James, in his prince regalia, crouched down to explain his proposals to Emma, using her own project charts as reference. The photo had gone viral, becoming a symbol of the monarchy's new direction. "Of course you can, sweetheart," Sarah called back. "Just remember what James taught you about measuring twice before hanging." "Once," Emma finished. "I know, Mom. I'm using math," James chuckled. "I've created a monster, haven't I?" says the man who turned my daughter's homework into national policy metaphors. They began unpacking boxes, mixing their lives together, one item at a time. Sarah's worn cookbooks next to James's state documents, Emma's school photos beside centuries of royal portraits, the fancy tea set that started it all now sharing cabinet space with Sarah's mismatched mugs. "Oh, look at this," James said, pulling out the original rain-soaked business card, carefully preserved. "Where should we put it?" "Frame it," Sarah decided, "right next to the tapestry. Let everyone see where our story really began." As if on cue, rain began to fall outside, a gentle spring shower that made everything feel fresh and new. Emma ran downstairs, clutching her weather charts. "See, the rain's blessing our new house." "Is that a scientific observation, Miss Emma?" James asked seriously. "Nope," she beamed. "Sometimes magic is better than science. Like how rain brought you to our door and now we're a real family." A car pulled up outside, the Queen arriving for their first family dinner in the new house. She'd insisted on cooking herself, though cooking apparently meant bringing the palace chef to give them all lessons. "Ready?" James asked softly, squeezing Sarah's hand. Sarah looked around their new home, at Emma showing her grandmother's quilt to a queen, at her cookbooks mixed with royal protocols, at the rain blessing their beginnings once again. This wasn't the fairy tale she'd imagined as a girl, but it was better. It was real, with math homework and cooking lessons and love that chose to bridge two worlds. "Ready," she answered, and meant it with all her heart. The wedding invitation was unlike any the royal family had ever issued. printed on recycled paper embedded with wildflower seeds. So love can grow, Emma had insisted. It combined traditional royal protocol with personal touches. The formal crest sat beside Emma's drawing of their family, now reproduced in elegant gold leaf. Most notably, it requested no gifts, just math books for the children's literacy program. Sarah stood before the mirror in a dress that managed to be both royal and realistic, designed by the palace couturier, but modified to her tastes. No 20-foot train or heavy crown, just elegant simplicity, and pinned near her heart, a small piece of her grandmother's quilt. "Mom!" Emma burst, in her junior bridesmaid dress swirling. "Guess what? The Queen, Grandma Helena, she's crying." She said they're happy tears, because James is finally himself. The Queen herself appeared in the doorway, elegant as always, but with suspiciously red eyes. "That child of yours," she said softly, "has no respect for royal secrets." But she was, smiling, as she helped Emma adjust her flower crown. The wedding combined both their worlds in ways that made headlines around the globe. The cathedral's grandeur was softened by wildflowers and children's artwork. Emma's entire math club served as junior attendants, their sashes decorated with geometric patterns. The king himself had suggested using the science fair project's improbability charts to arrange the seating. "Ready?" Sarah's boss asked. She'd chosen him to walk her down the aisle, a gesture of thanks for standing by her through all the media storms. The wedding march began, but not the traditional royal anthem. Instead, a children's choir sang "Over the Rainbow," arranged specially for the occasion. The cathedral fell silent as Sarah appeared. James waited at the altar, wearing his formal military uniform, but with one addition, a small multiplication table tucked into his pocket, Emma's good luck charm. His face, when he saw her, made every photographer forget protocol and snap away frantically. Their vows were their own, not the traditional royal declarations. James went first. "Sarah, I came to your door seeking shelter from a storm, but found my way home instead. You and Emma taught me that real nobility isn't about titles or traditions. It's about the courage to be genuine, the strength to help others learn and grow, and the wisdom to know that love is the greatest revolution of all." Sarah's voice shook slightly as she responded, "James, you walked into our lives as a prince, but won our hearts as just yourself. You turned math lessons into magic and ordinary moments into fairy tales. You showed us that sometimes the grandest traditions can be found in simple family dinners, and that true romance isn't about castles in the air. It's about building real homes where everyone belongs." Emma's role came next, a break from every royal protocol. She stepped forward with two items, her mother's well-worn cookbook and James's royal signet ring. "These represent our two worlds," she announced to the assembled dignitaries and guests. "And today they become one family." She handed the cookbook to James, the ring to her mother. "Because real fairy tales aren't about giving up who you are, they're about becoming more together." There wasn't a dry eye in the cathedral. The king was seen openly wiping his cheeks. The Queen clutched her handkerchief. Even the sternest council members looked moved. The reception broke more traditions. Instead of a formal ball, they held a family-style celebration in the palace gardens. Children ran between the tables. The king learned to make s'mores. The Queen joined Emma's math club friends in a game of geometry charades. As evening fell, James led Sarah to a quiet corner of the garden. "Look," he said, pointing to where Emma was teaching young princes and princesses from 3 countries. "How to calculate the angles of the setting sun. We've created quite a revolution," Sarah smiled. "No," James corrected softly. "We've created something better, a family. One that proves love doesn't have to follow old rules to honor ancient values." The rain that had threatened all day finally began to fall, gentle, warm drops that made the fairy lights glitter. But nobody ran for cover. Instead, Emma started calculating the rainfall probability. The Queen held out her hand to catch the drops. and the king quoted Emma's science fair project about storms bringing blessings. "Dance with me?" James asked, pulling Sarah into the rain. "I believe we have a tradition about important moments and rainfall." As they danced, their guests joined them, royalty and commoners, children and adults, all laughing in the warm spring shower. The photos would become iconic. A royal wedding where true love's kiss happened in the rain, where a crown prince danced with joy instead of duty, where a little girl's math project became a symbol of change. "Ready for our next chapter," James whispered. Sarah looked at their gathered family, Emma teaching dance steps to her new royal cousins, their parents swaying together, their worlds finally perfectly merged. With you, always. 1 year later, raindrops tapped against the windows of their townhouse as Sarah hung a new family portrait beside Emma's original crayon drawing. The photograph captured them on the palace steps, James in casual clothes, helping Emma with her science project, Sarah laughing as she adjusted the crown that kept slipping off his head, the king and queen in the background playing with Emma's probability charts. "Mom," Emma called from her study room, "can you help me with my presentation? It's for the Royal Youth Education Initiative." Sarah found her daughter surrounded by charts and graphs, looking so grown up in her school uniform. With its new Math Club President badge, the initiative had been Emma's idea, using her love of mathematics to help other children learn. Now, twice a week, the palace opened its doors to students from all backgrounds for special tutoring sessions. "Looking for help with probability again?" James asked, appearing in the doorway. He'd just returned from a council meeting, his tie loosened and crown tucked under his arm like a common accessory. "Actually," Emma grinned, "I'm teaching probability now, but I need help making it fun, like you did that first night." James sat cross-legged on the floor beside her, crown forgotten on a stack of textbooks. "Well, let's see. What if we calculate the odds of a rain-soaked prince finding his family on a stormy night?" "That's not very scientific," Emma protested. But she was already reaching for her calculator. Sarah watched them work, James pointing out numerical patterns, while Emma added her own creative twists. On the wall behind them hung her grandmother's quilt, now carefully preserved in a special frame, a reminder of where their story began. The Queen arrived unannounced, as she often did now, carrying a tin of her latest baking attempt. "I thought my favorite mathematicians might need brain food," she announced, setting down cookies that were only slightly charred. Her cooking lessons were still a work in progress. "Perfect timing, Grandma," Emma exclaimed. "We're calculating love probabilities." "Ah, like your science fair project?" The Queen settled elegantly onto a cushion. "You know, we still use your rainfall charts at council meetings. Your grandfather insists they're more accurate than the royal meteorologist." Sarah's phone buzzed with a news alert. "Modern monarchy. 1 year later. How a rainy night changed a nation." The article was accompanied by 2 photos, one of their first awkward public appearance at the zoo and one from yesterday's open palace event, where James had taught mathematics to a room full of children while wearing his crown slightly askew. "They still love that story, don't they?" James said, reading over her shoulder. "Because it's real," Sarah replied. "Everything we built, the education initiative, the open palace programs, the new royal protocols, it all started with genuine moments. Math homework and spaghetti dinners and a family quilt." Thunder rumbled outside, and Emma ran to the window. "Look! It's raining just like the night you met." They joined her at the window, watching the storm. James wrapped his arm around Sarah, while Emma calculated the precipitation patterns. Below, the security team huddled under umbrellas, now so familiar they were practically family. "You know," James said softly, "some people still call it a fairy tale." "It is," Emma declared, looking up from her calculations, "but the best kind. The kind that changes things, like how now any kid can learn math in a palace, and princes can make pancakes, and love is more important than old rules." Sarah, touched the small piece of quilt she still wore near her heart, now set in a delicate brooch. And sometimes, she added, the most magical stories are the ones we write ourselves. Outside, the rain continued to fall, blessing their home as it had that first night. Inside, a crown prince helped his daughter with homework, while his wife hung family photos and his mother burned cookies in their kitchen. Not a traditional fairy tale, perhaps, but something better. A real story of love, change, and the magic of ordinary moments made extraordinary by being shared. And they lived happily, authentically ever after.